It goes without saying that 23 has started at quite a gallop. For all of us in our home lives, we are subject to the increased costs across the board. In our working lives, there's the pressure in getting new staff and generally an increase in pressure. However, for charities that are working in the healthcare, homelessness, refugee and asylum-seeking sectors, all of whom are charity clients of ours in Mason, Hayes and Curran, we're very aware of the really increased pressure that they are working under at the moment. For those charities, it's quite difficult for them to take some time out to talk about and look at top trends and tips. But I would hope that myself and our team in Mason, Hayes and Curran have helped those charities and will continue to do so by reducing their burden on taking on some of their work and bringing solutions to them. For those of you who do have time to sit back for a few minutes and listen to some top tips and trends and what's coming down the tracks, I'll start with a tip. Unfortunately, it's not a tip for a horse, but it is a tip that might result in your charity releasing some cash, and that's always welcome. This is done by way of a CPRE application. What's that, Niamh, you might say? Well, if in your charity you have a legacy, a fund, any type of restricted cash that cannot be used for general purposes, and if the restriction is causing you a difficulty in terms of using that fund, a CPRE application can be brought to the charities regulator to try and release the funds. My colleague Emma Lawrence has had really good success in 22 in bringing these CPRE applications. There's quite a bit to them, but please do give this a bit of time. If you have one of these pots of monies, don't let 23 finish without trying to release the funds. Next, two things coming down the track. Firstly, the Charities Amendment Bill 2022 that was published in April 2022. Some of you may have listened to a webinar that my colleague Alice Murphy did in collaboration with the Wheel and Charities Institute Ireland. And then in July, Alice and others presented to, in person and both in script, the joint committee of the Oireachtas that is dealing with this draft bill. A few things for you to know about it. Firstly, it's not law, so you don't need to be too worried at this stage. When will it be law? Difficult to say. It still has to be finalised. It is still in draft. The Oireachtas committee did issue its report. There are some things we'd prefer if they were in it and some things that haven't been included in it. Once that bill is finalised, it has to go through 5 stages of both the Dáil and Seanad. Do we hope it will be law during 23? Of course we do, and we'll keep you up to date. But maybe if I mention 2 positives and 2 potential negatives, just to give you a flavour of what's in the draft bill. 2 positives. Firstly, the inclusion of the protection of human rights for the first time as a charitable purpose in Ireland. That's a wonderful thing, and we're all happy with that. Secondly, there's some clarity about the role of the company secretary and the fact that it's not automatically the position that the company secretary is a charity trustee. It's not perfect, but it's an improvement. But 2 potential negatives. One of the proposed clauses is that if any charity wants to change its governing instrument or its constitution, it must go and get the consent of the charities regulator. In our view, this is too much to ask of charities, and it's also too much pressure to put on the regulator. If perhaps a charity wants to change the number of meetings its board holds in a year, and that is already in its governing instrument, it's daft that the charity should have to go to the regulator and get the prior consent to change from 6 meetings to 8 meetings. I completely appreciate that if a charity wishes to change its charitable purpose or any of the required clauses of the regulator, of course they should seek the consent of the regulator. What we're looking for here is some proportionality. Another potential negative is the number of instances in which the regulator can deregister a charity. We all know that trust is absolutely key in the charity sector, and if a charity is deregistered, it's a huge issue. The fact that a charity can appeal that deregistration really isn't the answer, because the damage is already done. So we have asked for a review of the number of instances in which the regulator can decide to deregister. A reminder that a huge part of the new bill deals with financial accounting and reporting. And when the bill is enacted, We anticipate that the Act will issue at the same time as the Financial Accounting and Reporting Regulations. The only thing I will say about them, which is of real importance, is that if your charity is established as a company and you haven't been complying with any charities regulator requirements in relation to financial reporting and accounting, that will all change. Companies will be treated the exact same, so you'll be reporting to both the Company Registration Office and the charities regulator, sometimes in relation to different levels of funds. The other piece of potential legal change coming down the tracks in 23 is a discussion paper that the Law Reform Commission has issued, asking for submissions in relation to unincorporated associations. This is something that we in Mason Hayes will definitely be making a submission on, because many of our charity clients and many of our not-for-profit clients are established as unincorporated associations. I know that the charities regulator has also issued a request to charities that are established as unincorporated associations to perhaps get involved in this submission. So that's one tip and two things coming down the track in 23. My trends, governance, what's new says you. But what specifically in relation to governance? Two things I'd mention very briefly. Charities Governance Code. Everybody found 22 much easier to comply with, which is wonderful. So why are charities still coming to us in Mason Hayes in relation to the Charities Governance Code? The main reason they're still coming to us is in relation to charity trustee training. Remember that there is an obligation under the code that charities provide training not only for new charity trustees who must get an induction, but that all charity trustees get adequate training. Remember that when you are confirming compliance with the Charities Regulator Governance Code, that you must also provide evidence of that compliance. We provide the charity trustee training. This is not only me selling our wares, but I do honestly think it is a really worthwhile thing for every charity to provide for its charity trustees. It can be recorded and repeated as your new charity trustees join. So if you haven't engaged in charity trustee training yet, I would really encourage that you do. The second issue in relation to governance that we are dealing with is efficiencies. Many of our clients, as well as providing details of governance compliance to the charities regulator, are required and obliged to provide the same type, in many instances, of compliance and confirmation to other organisations. In particular for our Section 38 hospital clients, they are required to provide huge compliance confirmations to both the HSE and the charities regulator. We have worked with a number of them to try and reduce the amount of duplication and to make things more efficient for them. We've done similar work with other charity sectors. And given the pressure that all your voluntary board members are under, and you as CEOs and staff are under to actually deliver the charitable service, I would really encourage you during 23 to try and see how you can reduce duplication and become more efficient. My final four things to keep a lookout for in 2023 are cybercrime, concern letters, board unrest, and investment policies. A quick 2 seconds on each. Cybercrime. Charities are definitely an easy hit. We need to be very conscious of that. We all know why. It's because of the trust we have generally in society, and also because we have funds. We have seen an increase in cybercrime attacks on charities. So for 23, I would really recommend that all charities check out their cybercrime policies and make sure that all staff members are up to date in relation to them. Also to remember that Section 59 of our Charities Act 2009 requires you to report any theft or fraud to the regulator. That's not only theft or fraud that might unfortunately happen within your charity where maybe an employee is involved, but also in these unsuspecting circumstances of cybercrime, you must report it. Next, concern letters. A number of new clients have come to Mason Hayes recently because they've received concern letters from the charities regulator. Firstly, I should say it is not essential that you go to your legal advisor on receipt of a concern letter, but it is essential that you give it the time and attention it requires. Don't panic. Sometimes these don't lead to anything untoward. But the very first thing you must do is share it with all of your charity trustees and let them decide the best way forward. But please do not sit on a concern letter. My third thing to mention to you to be aware of for 23 is board unrest. I'm not sure exactly why, maybe is it a post-COVID thing, but we have had more charities come to us in relation to board unrest than ever before. It's not something I can speak freely about, but what I would highly recommend is that if there is a member of your board who is causing trouble on your board, that you deal with it ASAP. Do not let it fester and do not let it linger. If you are in the lucky position that you don't have any board unrest, now is the time to look at your governing instrument or your constitution and see what does it say about removing a member of your board. Is it easily done and how can it be done? If there's nothing there, should you be putting something into your constitution so that if that terrible day does come, you're ready and prepared? And finally, investment policies. And here I'm not talking about what should be an investment policy and what shouldn't, because most of us are aware of that, and don't forget that the buck stops with the charity trustees in relation to investment policies and the investments made. What I do want to mention, however, is some talk that is going on in the UK for quite some time in relation to the ability of charity trustees to take into account certain things other than maximising profit when looking at what they invest in. And very much here the conversation is along the lines of ESG investing and whether or not that is permitted. There's been recent case law in the UK, it's called the Butler-Sloss case, and I think it's very worthwhile for us all to be aware of it, and I'll keep you up to date with anything else in relation to this during 23, but it makes for interesting reading. So that's it, folks. A few tips, a few trends, and a few words on what's coming down the tracks for 2023. From myself and the team here in Mason, Hayes and Curran, we wish all of our charity clients the very best for 23. I know it will be a demanding year, but I hope that it's extremely rewarding. And thank you.